Greetings, everyone. It is February 20th, 2024. Good to see so many of our returning College Autism Network community members and perhaps some new folks as well here today. I'm Brett Nachman with College Autism Network, and this is our monthly Canvas meeting where we showcase the great work coming out of scholars and practitioners and self-advocates and a variety of individuals within our community of autism in higher education. Today, we are glad to have a presentation from Gary McManus out of Rochester Institute for Technology. This was some work that was shared at our College Autism Summit, and it's really dynamic stuff. So we're really glad to be bringing Gary and all the insights stemming from this project on autistic college student success to all of you. A few housekeeping things. Please make sure to have your microphones muted, but you're welcome to turn it on if you'd like. We also want to remind folks that if you are not on our Canvas listserv, why aren't you on our listserv? You should be, because we have a lot of great content coming out of there, including recruitment opportunities for folks to participate in research studies. Often it's an exchange of ideas and resources and new articles that may come out. It's also the best way to be apprised of our forthcoming Canvas meetings and video recordings as well. And as we often do with our Canvas meetings, we try to make them interactive as much as possible, even though there's certainly some presentation content, but we want to hear from you, and we have an icebreaker activity if you feel so inclined to participate either in the chat or verbally. And the prompt for this month is, what is one of your favorite weekend activities? So I know for many of you, it is cold where you are, so maybe some things are more in the house versus outside the house, or if you feel brave enough to endure colder temperatures, go for it. But what are some examples of outdoor activities, or excuse me, weekend activities that you most enjoy? And we'll hear some thoughts from everybody as they come in the chat, or feel free to share aloud. All right, so I see gardening from Lori, Kendra saying brewery visits, Megan reading and avoiding the cold, Clarissa is spending time at the local public library, yoga for Jill, Brian loves a good book and a blanket, Jan is having fun biking on her favorite rail trail, Lauren goes out for a long run. Amy loves hiking with her two doodles. Going to the movies for Chris. Theo is saying dining or spending time with our kids. Bethany's up for thrifting. Margot's up for walking on the beach. Hiking, walking, and jogging for Gary. Dancing and hiking for Eric. More references to library for Siva Priya. Library visits with the toddler. And family time. Oh, I think clearly we just need more hours in the day for all these activities. So I guess it's very fortuitous that we get a leap day in just over a week for partaking in those activities. Thanks for indulging in that. So I don't know, maybe we'll feel inspired, since it's still the start of the new year, to take up a new activity, New Year's resolution. I guess we'll have to check in with folks. A few things before we move forward with Gary's presentation. We want to make sure that all of you, if you are interested in becoming a formal College Autism Network member, which affords a number of benefits, that you go ahead and check it out in terms of what some of the unique benefits are if you're an institution, if you're a small program, if you're an individual, even if you're a student. So I'm going to drop that in the chat right now, because we certainly want to make sure folks are renew their membership if they haven't already. And if you haven't participated in getting a membership, this might be a good time. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our executive director, Lee Williams, to share some of the new and exciting stuff with CAN. And boys, there are a lot going on.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brett, for the plug for membership. Your membership supports the work that we do, and so we're really grateful when people spend their limited resources to help support the College Autism Network. I want to mention two things that are coming up. The first is Square One, and that is a 2-day virtual instructional series, a Thursday afternoon for, I think, 5 hours, and then a Friday afternoon for a couple of hours, plus some follow-up meetings. And Square One is for higher ed professionals who are interested in launching a new autism or neurodiversity program, or have maybe a small initiative going on and really want to take it to the next level. And so this is virtual. It's really convenient and inexpensive way to figure out how to plan for, develop, execute, and assess a new program. And so that's happening on March 21st and 22nd. I'll put these in the chat. The second thing is we're calling Halfway to the Summit. As you know, the College Autism Summit is our in-person event that takes place in October. We'll be in Columbus, Ohio in October of this year. But there's been requests for more virtual content, so we thought we'd pause in between summits and do some virtual content. So we've pulled some of the best speakers and content from the 2023 summit. We're making it virtual with a lot of opportunity for interaction and discussion. So it's a great opportunity to network with people. Very inexpensive. If you're a CAN member, it's only $50. If you're not a member, it's $125. So it would be great to join and get the lower rate. And that's taking place on 2 successive Thursdays, March 28th and April 4th, from 12 to 4:30. And so you can attend one day or both days. And I will put links to both of those right here in the chat, so you can click on that and read more about who the speakers will be and more about the content. If you have any questions, you can always contact me directly. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Lee. Lots of good stuff going on, for sure. I'm definitely excited to see the amount of programming that we're offering online. And I also want to turn it, before we get into the meat of the time today with Gary's presentation, this is always the spot where we turn it over to all of you. If there are any announcements you'd like to share, resources you'd like to pass along, articles you've read that were interesting, joyous news, this is a space to share with the wider community for some ideas and some perspectives, and or just to pass along some information. So would anybody like to share anything that's going on? So it looks like in the chat, Theo mentions that they're going to study credit mobility of autistic students. That's definitely a new area of work. That's awesome. So if anybody has any experience on that front, reach out to Theo. Siva Priya mentions in the chat recent read in their learning community, and they dropped in a hyperlink to an article. Yeah, I just came across this one too. This was in the Journal of Diversity in Higher Ed. It's the article is called Developing an Inclusive Campus for Autistic Students. So there's a lot of different resources, and they pull on universal design for learning as kind of the foundation for a lot of recommendations that the authors push forward. So yeah, thanks for dropping that in the chat. That is a fine example of a recent piece. Other items people want to pass along. Oh, yes. Okay. Eric recently wrote an article on supporting autistic students applying to college. He mentions that Lee and myself, Brett, were kind enough to contribute quotes. We'll put the link in the chat shortly. Yeah, and that was in the Journal of College Admission, if I remember correctly. And yeah, pulled on a lot of perspectives there. Thanks, Eric. Well, as other items surface or you'd like to share, feel free to drop those in the chat. And at this point, I'm really pleased to turn it over to our featured presenter for this month. We have Gary McManus out at Rochester Institute for Technology. And Gary, did I mess up the pronunciation or did I say it right? I feel like I messed it up.
You did great. We're
Okay.
moving on. Appreciate you, Brett, and thanks to you and Lee for the introduction, and for the invitation to share this. I'm going to try to share my screen right now, just in the simplest way possible, and just wait for a thumbs up that this is working well enough.
Yeah, that's working great, Gary. And just so everybody knows, if as you have questions or comments, feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll have a formal Q&A portion at the end. So if folks want to contribute, don't hesitate to do that. Over to you, Gary.
Hey, thanks, Brett. And Kendra, our director, and I and our team of students had a great time in Nashville. Really looking forward to hopefully seeing you in Columbus. I'm Gary McManus. I'm an educator. I'm originally from Ireland. I use he, him pronouns, and I see myself as neurotypical. I work at RIT, which is a large private, not-for-profit, research-oriented, STEM-focused university. It's big, it's diverse, it's rigorous, it can be complicated, it's expensive. And in terms of diversity, I would say we don't really know how many autistic or neurodivergent students attend RIT. The numbers you see in orange on the screen are from our colleagues in the Disability Services Office. There was also a recent university study at about a 30% response rate, so robust, but certainly not complete. And they told us that 2% of student respondents self-identified as autistic, 24% self-identified as neurodivergent. And we also saw that maybe as many as 40% self-identified as LGBTQ+, non-binary or gender non-conforming. And these are all groups among which we know there's a lot of overlap, and I'm really interested in right now, but it's not something I can speak about in great detail today. Everything that I am going to speak about, it comes not from research, but from assessment. So unlike some of our other presentations over the last couple of months, the starting point for us was not study design and recruitment. What you're about to see are insights drawn from literally hundreds of coaching sessions with students over 2 consecutive terms. And my job, my task, was to try to capture just a small fraction of the experiences that our students shared during that year to see what it was we could learn. We do offer programs and services outside of one-to-one and group coaching, including social meetups. We also have a neurodiverse hiring initiative for students that are competing amongst their peers for co-ops and internships, which is a big feature of life at RIT, but these will really be great conversations for another day. The work that I'm going to talk about today took place under our former director, Dr. Laurie Ackles. She's a great friend of CAN and of Canvas, and currently based in Seattle, Washington. But this is really for me to say, in terms of positionality, I want to point out that at the current moment, none of our staff members self-identify as autistic or neurodivergent. For myself, I don't claim for a moment to be any kind of expert in autism, quote unquote. Our students are the experts in autism as a lived experience. And so my hope is that as a full-time RIT staff member, I can nevertheless be an effective campus ally. So the question we really started off with, and I'm coming to today with, is how do we measure success? And since this is not a scholarly study, again, I'm not starting from any large national data set or setting out to fill a gap in the existing literature. I'm not coming at this from any kind of established theoretical lens, shall we say, or where the goal for me is really to transform our program's continuous assessment practices to be more student-oriented and more inclusive. How I usually put this or break this down for audiences is that, in general, the problem as I see it is that we usually measure the ends of student success or the outputs of student success. We're talking about term GPA, time to graduation, rate of employment, And we don't, maybe not enough, measure the means of success or the inputs of success, what's required for that success to even show up as a downstream effect. And those are things like having healthy habits, students say in the research, supportive friends, having access to adequate mental health services. And no, don't get me wrong, it's fun to make charts and the numbers are good to know. I like to be able to say 84% of SSP members are in good academic standing with the GPA above 2.0. We can see from this chart, even before COVID, we knew for several years, that's first years in blue, were having a tougher time with attrition than their colleagues in their second, third, or fourth years in purple. You know, it's good to know then that our first year retention rate roughly matches that of RIT, but we're talking about a very, very large sample size for the RIT retention rate in the black line and a much smaller sample size for our little program and our little office over here in the campus center, which is in the blue line. So we should expect a lot of noise in those numbers. But still, anyway, what all of this does is reduces the student's experience down to an outcome, down to a product or a percentage point. So I want to come forward with a new question, and that's to honor the neurodiversity of our students. We chose to start from their goals and then to learn the best ways to help the students achieve those goals. So our coaching process takes place over the course of a semester. Remember, we meet with students each week to discuss a whole range of issues. There's going to be logistics here, like enrollment, help with housing, setting up accommodations, putting in place plans for final exams. There'll be a lot of work on academics that you'll see. We ask students to complete a syllabus review, give frequent progress updates on their academics to their courses. We help them work on assignment planners, if that's a strategy that works for them. But what you see on the screen is embedded in the process. What I chose to do was to keep our start of semester goal setting process early in the semester, weeks 2 to 4. And then at the end of the semester, we've always had an end of semester reflection process. And that's where almost all the information in this presentation comes from semi-structured conversations with the students. I want to note at this point, not only that I'm in the late stages of a cold and I'm battling that, maybe you hear it in my voice, but I also want to note that I'm going to share a lot of information in this presentation. What I'm going to do is pause frequently to allow viewers just to take it in at their own pace. I'm not going to read it all. You're welcome, as Brett said, to put down observations or questions in the chat. If you're monitoring that for me, Brett, I really appreciate it. But you can also keep them for the Q&A portion at the end. And if even with all of that, if I'm still going far too fast, much to my chagrin, there's a recording. So how does it work? Our students at the start of the semester indicate a general direction for coaching in 5 key areas: their health, their social connections, network building on campus, self-advocacy, broadly speaking. Also planning and prioritizing academics, which is the #1 ask that students have for us, and helping them to prepare for co-op and career. We discuss their motivations and challenges. We try to keep it positive, keep it practical. We ask open-ended questions, really in an effort to meet students where they're at. I did, as I talked about at Cannes, kind of crowdsource 10 or so goals in each area from SSP students in the past. I piloted some that I read about or heard about on a podcast, some that just kind of seemed like a good idea. I removed others that had no traction with students. It's experimental, it's iterative. And really what I'm going for is for goals to be seen as something that are shared among many students who are on a joint adventure and not created by single individuals who are forging their own very unique and potentially isolated path. You know, if nothing else, I try to send the message that college is at heart a collective enterprise. We do build on the things that students already like to do, strategies that already work for them. So we try to solicit that information from their past experience. We give some pointers. We might share some links to further information, depending on what goal it is the student has selected to stay healthy in this case. And students and coaches get an automatically generated printout of these particular sessions for future reference, so they can go back and kind of talk about what their goals were and how things are going. But a lot can happen over 10 weeks. So at the end of the semester, we come back and we ask them what they actually ended up focusing on during the semester, knowing full well that students' priorities change. Stuff happens, things come up, barriers present themselves. So we check with them again, you know, what ended up happening, what did happen with your various priorities from the beginning of the semester, without criticism. And know that we all make resolutions, at least maybe once a year, most of us, with the best of intentions. And we know that things always don't turn out the way we want them to, but we ask students about their sense of progress at the end of the semester based on whatever it was that took place over those 14 or 15 weeks. This for me is very, very important. Can't emphasize this enough. In its design, such as it is, we are not assessing whether our students measure up, quote unquote, to our predetermined standards or benchmarks for performance. We ask students to set their own goals, then they reflect on their progress, and then we measure our impact by how helpful they say we are. That's the general gist, to be able to put students first and to base our progress on how helpful they see us as being toward their progress. So for today's presentation, the question essentially is, I want to figure out if students actually set priorities outside of academics. That was our opening sally, so much more so than a hypothesis. Well, what did we learn? It kind of gets to the heart of the matter. What I'm asking here is, how holistic is the student's own view of their college experience? How important is it for our students that we take this larger, multifaceted view of success outside of the traditional benchmarks that I mentioned? Maybe unsurprisingly, fewer students put a high priority on social connection and self-care at the top, their health and their spending time with other students, than on academic planning. Talking about 39–40% is a high priority versus the 64% who say that academic planning is their high priority. But what I see when I look at this graph is that, look, at least 75% of all students acknowledge these other areas as somewhat of a priority. It opens the door to this more expansive definition of success that we're trying to figure out and to see if it has any currency among our students who are enrolled in our program. If we break down the students' priorities according to year level, I perceive kind of a timeline. First years, in blue, at the top, prioritize making friends, 68%. Third years, all the way at the bottom in purple, prioritize finding a co-op, preparing for a career. You might notice under self-care, for our second years in orange, that they seem to think that mental health is not a high priority. But I also noticed that the third years, just below them, they seem to know better. But here's the thing. What we saw is that in the spring, many of these apparent differences between the cohorts essentially vanished. Now it looks as though in the spring, they're even more focused on academics and finding a job, perhaps as opposed to finding a group of friends or doing the things that you need to do to stay healthy. But whether we're going to call it a high or a low priority, or the students are going to perceive it as such, we still want to know in a more detailed level what our student experience is are like throughout the semester. So here's how students say they want to connect socially with their peers. This tells me our crowdsourced goals kind of generally resonate. These are things that students are interested in doing. There was a small number of students who chose self-created goals, if you like. But honestly, they're not very different. Go out for meals, have a date, start a meetup, join in a larger group activity. Things that we can easily kind of iterate and adopt into a new version of the survey to kind of represent these motivations that students have socially as well. There are a range of things that students say get in the way of their goals. Students face intrinsic as well as extrinsic barriers to meeting their social needs. What I notice here, very crude breakdown might be, we see some diagnosis or self-diagnosis. We're not a clinical setting, but this is just what students tell us. We also see a lot of self-awareness. There might be some structural constraints, like students on part-time schedules, not being on campus when everybody else is on campus. We've just been through a pandemic. But I also notice a lot of intentional self-preservation efforts on the part of students to say that this is maybe why I'm not connecting with other students to the degree that I want to, is because I don't have the spoons. We ask students to tell us about social barriers that they have. And I stress that it's other than schoolwork because everyone says schoolwork. And maybe what you see here, if I give you a moment to read. Some students see the fault in themselves. Some see maybe the failings of others. And some say, you know, look, this is college, just is what it is. Our RIT students and SSP members are no different in that they are involved in an absolutely huge range of clubs. This isn't even all of them. It's all I could fit on the slide. Shout out to the Order of Cardboard Knights. But when it comes to meeting up informally outside of the campus club circuit, this is how students tell us that their favorite social strategies for connecting with others. It won't surprise anyone in the room that the D&D crowd at the top outnumber the bowling league toward the bottom. Tongue in cheek, according to this graph, you know, someone really might be out there bowling alone, but all the cool kids are playing Pokemon in a giant convention center. Times change and students are finding what works for them. There's a lot to be excited about. It maybe also, just off the cuff, seem to lend some support to some social psychology that people might be familiar with, that it does seem to represent the preferred social strategies for male identified people in terms of getting together for activities, as opposed to casually getting together for conversation. But I also look at the group and say that this is really, it's a mix, and different strategies work for different people. And that all these options are available with the motivation, and if we can do something to mitigate the barriers that get in the way. And of course, students also offer other choice suggestions for how to hang, and also observations for things that either work or don't work for them. We'll notice some patterns with our students' goals for health and wellness. There's going to be crossover between social connections and health and wellness, exactly as we predict and we read about all the time. We have a few goals that were crowdsourced and resonate widely among students. Multiple students choose multiple goals, of course. But these are the top, technically 6, that kind of clump together at the top of our survey. And again, a small number of students chose other goals outside of these kinds of familiar paths. And to me, they seem very practical, again, easily adopted into the next iteration of the survey. And again, we see certain barriers crop up, both extrinsic in gray and, roughly speaking, intrinsic orange. Didn't draw too many hard conclusions or use strict definitions. My observation, naively maybe, is that far more students perceive, or at least offer, intrinsic barriers to their health and wellness, maybe, than extrinsic obstacles. Here's the list of other barriers, which is less than 3% of students who responded identified other barriers. But they're big ones: money, weather, politics, and just, people. Now, here it's worth keeping in mind, perhaps, unlike the wider student population, 16,000 people out there on campus, that 75% of our student members volunteer the information that they take prescribed medications by their doctors. The reason that we ask this is so that we can give appropriate reminders or ask timely questions when it comes to, well, generally speaking, just the necessity to get a refill when you're away from home, or if you have a medication that can't be sent in the mail, or as many of us experienced over the last 2 years, there's a nationwide shortage of medications that doctors have prescribed for students to stay healthy. So that's why we know this information. I just wanted to disclose that. But it's really important context for our daily work, to keep that in mind, that half of our students do have mental health support. Most of them to come in with our relationships with providers that are not on campus. And those medications, ADHD and anxiety at the top, seem to, what do you want to say, lead the field over other conditions that students might be diagnosed with or might experience. But what really struck me, and I want to point your attention toward, is all the way at the bottom, that under other, that our students are dealing with a lot. So in a sense, given all this, planning and prioritizing, the remarks I made at the beginning, I'm well aware that it goes way beyond academics. That planning and prioritizing is essentially the student's #1 go-to strategy for coping with all of this, of these demands on their time, and also on their bandwidth. But I also want to stress that students are also out there on campus doing all kinds of healthy things for their physical wellness and for their mental wellness. They've got all kinds of ways of keeping up with the chaos of daily life in college. And in many cases, they are frequently checking in with their families at home. They are reaching out, their families are engaged, and our SSP family is highly supportive of the work that we do. And just because we lean on the importance of student autonomy and fostering independence, it doesn't mean that students necessarily need to go through this as isolated or alone. And besides, you know, they've got all kinds of things that they love to do. They're out there swinging on the swings. They're out there playing with the kiddies. And sitting in the rain, which is very cinematic. Reminds me of John Cusack movies that I grew up with, maybe Jennifer Garner movies that I grew up with. Students often know what it is that they need to do to stay healthy, and our role is to make sure that they're in a good position to be able to do that. So I'm going to go all the way back to where we started, because how much do we as coaches actually talk about or talk with students about their lives outside of homework and projects and assignments and exams? How much do our students discuss these important aspects of their lives with us? If you're in your third year or above in purple, in fall of 22-23, the answer is not much, it turns out. The students' perception is that these are not conversations that they're having with their coaches regularly, or even sometimes. They're having these conversations rarely. That doesn't seem to be true for first years and second years, which is something we spend a lot of time thinking about and planning around. We did see a little bit of an uptick in the spring on the basis of just some minor kind of tweaks and interventions and changes of messages and things. But the reality at this point in the year might be that the job market pressures dominate the conversation from the student's perspective. That's what it is they've spent most of their time talking about, is in the case all the way down at the bottom in purple, the primacy of searching for and securing a co-op for the following summer, or for summer, fall, or whatever the case might be. Based on that, do our students say that they improved their progress outside academics, which I'm for now using as a shorthand for success, growth, progress, success, using terms interchangeably to see what has traction with students. It's not to say that students didn't report progress. If they discussed any of these 5 areas, they said that they discussed it throughout the semester regularly or sometimes, the perception that they progressed or improved is overwhelming. And maybe you'd expect also they might hit a little bit of a plateau in the spring, or maybe an increase in pressure, or it could be a second semester slump. I don't want to minimize it. It's clearly there for us to see that they didn't feel as successful in the second semester as they had in the first semester. But we can break things down a little bit further. Let's do a quick time check. Okay, let's break things down just a little bit further if you can bear with me for a few minutes. I want to show you that I think that there's a progress premium for students who say or perceive, or who in fact do, discuss things regularly with their coaches. These are the students in the fall who said they discussed one or more of these areas on a regular basis with their coach. And at the end of the semester, this is how much that they said that they improved: significantly, moderately, slightly, or not at all. In terms of social connections, health and wellness, building a campus network, self-advocacy, broadly speaking, planning and prioritizing academics, and co-op prep. The students who said that they discussed these areas sometimes also broadly perceived progress, improvement, success. Maybe, for being very persnickety, you would see less students saying they improved significantly. These are separate questions, and I'm just pulling them together. Maybe more students are likely to say, yeah, improve slightly. But they're still very, very likely to perceive success as measured by their own standards toward their own goals. So here comes the moneymaker. What happened with the students who said that they discussed these areas rarely with their coaches? So look, it's not as if students can't succeed without coaching. You'll never find me saying that. Our students are highly capable, they're highly motivated in a very challenging environment. You can see, especially socially, students are out there making progress and improvements and succeeding toward their social goals, many of them without ever really talking about it in coaching. There may not be a link there at all. But if you just follow the numbers without maybe pushing for any kind of statistical causation, I, for one, am struck by how effective it is for students to discuss these areas of their lives that I've been sharing with you with their coach, a trusted person, grad student or professional on a weekly basis, versus those that either choose or because of circumstances decide not to. So this, for me, it's borne out by a Bob Hoskins commercial from the 90s. So this is probably a reference that nobody else in the room gets other than me. But what this seems to suggest for me is it's good to talk. So this phase of the project for 22-23 really focused on wellness and belonging. We primarily looked at the difference in experiences among year groups. That was our programmatic question. That was our push factor. We had to figure out the differences in the cohorts or the year groups. We do have some directions for the future. The work on wellness and belonging is ongoing. Here you see some students sounding that theme at the end of the year in their response. But you also see students out there thinking about issues to do with equity and accessibility. And we have students who are thinking about their rights and responsibilities as community advocates, as a non-autistic community member. I'm really excited about that. My current goal for this year's assessment cycle, and it's already February, so the heat is on, I guess, is to really take a similar approach, but embrace the students' multiple intersecting identities and communities. That's really, really important for me and for us and for our program, I would say, at this point in time. We can use the same inclusive, student-centered approach in keeping with our mission to really be more inclusive of the entire spectrum of neurodiversity, including gender and sexuality, race and ethnicity, and also, as the student brought up, access and equity.
Gary, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. Let me turn it over to our community who have a number of questions for you. Really stellar reflection points, I think, and you packed a lot of content in there, but so much for us to think about. Let's turn it over. The first question that I'm seeing here is just a quick one from Natasha, as far as would there be any way for folks in Canvas to obtain a copy of the slides beyond the video recording that we'll put on our YouTube channel? Is that something you might be amenable to? Okay, looks like we got a thumbs up there. Yeah, so Gary, feel free to either send that out directly, or you can share that with me and I'll put them in the email with the notes and video recording. First question from Theo. Did you notice any differences in the importance of goals between fall and spring, or are these the two colors? So it looks like this may be referencing a particular slide, but or Theo, if you're still with us, feel free to expand on that if that's helpful.
Yes, I noticed that for social goals or academic goals, you combine the fall and spring answers, and I was wondering if there's a difference between these two periods, these two semesters.
Okay, I'm frantically flicking back in my slides, Theo, so I don't misrepresent what we discovered. So if you take all of the students kind of as a cohort of about 100+ students, we had about 85% response rate in the fall, an 89% response rate in the spring. That could be for any number of reasons, but it's essentially almost every student that we work with, unless they took a leave of absence or left the university, or we lost track of them, or they didn't continue to engage in coaching. There's all kinds of reasons. And what we noticed as that large 100-person cohort is that in every semester, there just seemed to be a slight diminution of the priority of every goal. It's only slight, so I don't want to overemphasize it. So if we had, 47% of students saying social connections was a high priority, we saw 30% of students said the same thing in the spring. It just kind of tapered off from semester to semester. The same thing with the self-care, if I understand your question, is we have about 45% of students in the fall said, yeah, this is really important to me. And that kind of went down to about 40% in the spring. The two that stayed consistent in terms of how high the priority was for the students as a big group were academic planning remained 64-65% fall to spring, and the importance of the co-op prep stayed at about 58% from fall to spring. Where things got really interesting, Theo, is when we tried to break it down by the groups. How did the first years feel versus the third years? How did the second years feel as rising second years feel, as opposed to the first years that they once were? And that got really, really complicated. But I tried to boil it down as best I could in the slides with the colors. And those, because it comes from assessment and not from research, we are happy to share.
Great, appreciate you expanding on that for everybody. Next question comes from Lee. What about gender differences or gender identity? Were those components explored in this assessment, Gary?
That work I mentioned at the end has been foremost on my mind while this work was happening, and we just didn't have enough responses to students who volunteered that identifying as LGBTQ+ was important to them. That was our question. Is identifying as RIT has a robust network of students in the LGBTQ+ community. That could mean different things. Give a little bit of a preamble, and we said, is identifying as LGBTQ+ or as an LGBTQ+ student important to you? And we piloted that question and we got a response rate, but it was not kind of cross-matched and embedded into this round of the assessment cycle. When we had other goals to do with the year difference, as I mentioned, different students in different years having different experiences. My number one goal in this role that I play is to try that again with the spring, coming up with the spring, where we'll have a bigger sample size, potentially a better question, more responses for students, and then we'll be able to cross-match with everything else they said about their experiences, about how helpful they think we are, about the worth of our services, but also about the barriers that they face and the progress that they're making, be able to make a nice and hopefully meaningful answer to that question, maybe hopefully not this time next year, but it will take a little while.
Definitely worth further exploration. Next question comes from Tony. Of the social challenges experienced by autistic students, how much is due to autism and how much seems to be driven more by mental and physical co-occurring conditions?
Who did that question come from? Because I want to thank them.
Tony.
Tony, thank you. Not in this presentation, but we do survey students outside of coaching about same question is identifying as an autistic student important to you? Students can say, I choose not to answer, not applicable, or they can say yes, maybe, or no. And of the students that say yes or maybe, so they can see a few more questions in the survey if they say maybe, the number one impact that they say on their experience at RIT, that's the question, is with friendships, making friends, social connections. So that's kind of separate from this questionnaire, how it's structured, but it's one of our guiding principles. One of the tensions that we have, just another second, Tony, one of the tensions that we have even programmatically as a staff is that if you survey the students and you say, is identifying as an autistic student important to you, 90% of, 85% of them will say yes or maybe. And then we'll say, well, how does autism impact your experience at RIT? And 90% of them will say, when it comes to making friends. And then we'll say in a separate questionnaire in coaching, is social connections something that's important to you for coaching? If you're a first year, the answer is 68%. Yes, high priority. And then it rapidly falls off from there. In the spring, as I showed you on the slide, about 30% of people think that that's a high priority. So there does seem to be a tension that we need to investigate more, is that they're saying it's really meaningful, but at the same time, not seeing coaching as playing a major role in their plans or their success.
Great, appreciate the expansion on that. What other questions might folks have? We probably have time for one or two more. Oh, I'm sorry. Looks like we have one from Lauren. Just seeing that now. Lauren asks, you mentioned that some students chose multiple goals to focus on. On average, how many goals did each student have per semester? Were the goals the same in fall and spring, or did they update them each semester? Did you notice if having more goals than average had any positive or negative impact on the outcome? Looks like a few questions there.
More goals than average. Thanks so much, Lauren. The question that didn't get to in this assessment cycle, remember this is essentially like in Google, this is my 20% of time for my work that I get to work on my passion project, while the other 80% is program support and student support. So when someone at the end of the meeting says, well, is there a relationship between how many goals they choose? And I've heard research, I've heard Adam Grant talking about that actually, that fewer goals are better. And also, is there a relationship between which goals do students choose that kind of seem to correlate with a higher degree of success? Are there kind of like high success goals and low success goals? These are great questions that I cannot venture to answer right now. I'd love to think more about that.
Yeah, I think there's just endless opportunities to fill your 20% time there, given all these inquiries. We'll conclude with Wes's question.
Sure.
Wes puts in, to what extent do you think the quality, italicized, the quality of the student-coach relationship had influence or bearing on students' perception of success, if at all?
Ooh. So I won't make up numbers because I wasn't coming into this session thinking in terms of our program effectiveness, kind of data use that we report to the university. But I did mention that we ask students in the end of their continuing experience survey questionnaire is what we call it. And we ask them kind of very pointed questions about the quality of coaching. Now, to this point, I haven't taken those quality questions where we know and we can brag about, albeit without numbers, that students are highly engaged in coaching and really and truly appreciative of their coaches and see their coaches, quote unquote, going to bat for them all the time and helping them to navigate challenging situations. So we know that the quality is really high because we brag about it at the university. But the relationship between the quality of coaching and the perception of success is something that I have just added to my list, Wes.
All right, sounds like you have a lot that you're you're going to need to share out the 2024 summit. So
I
the
love it,
challenge
Brett.
is-
I love it. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, much appreciated. I think what I think we're seeing from you and your colleagues' work and having such a high number of students in your program fill this out is really emblematic of what we're seeing at a national level with the PISA study in terms of the notion of students wanting a go-to person. In your program's case, it's having the coaches, this notion of friendships being a key indicator or impact. We're seeing that too. So it's just it's really validating to see what you all are doing. And thanks to all of you for contributing your great ideas that I think are going to shape some future directions for the assessment. At this point, we want to say thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you at our next Canvas meeting, which I'm going to pull up as far as the date, but I have 5 different windows on my screen, so I can only tell you a few details at a time. Our next meeting is set for Wednesday, March 22nd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. That's where we're going to have a great team, including Kiara Latimer, Dr. Amy Accardo, and Dr. Casey Woodfield out of Rowan University, discuss their work about affirming neurodiversity culture on campus. So we'll look forward to that. I know for many of you, or some of you, that will be spring break, so consider that a great piece of programming to fill that time. And we look forward to seeing you all very soon. In the meantime, stay tuned to what's happening on our Canvas listserv, and we'll be providing a link to this recording via our College Autism Network YouTube channel in the next week. And I will want to just put one final plug for our YouTube channel because we had a fantastic video that was created and filmed at our last summit in Nashville that features a lot of information about CAN and the work that you all and that we collectively do. So I'm just going to put a link in the chat if you want to check that out. It's a really nice illustration of what we do as a community. So thank you all, and we'll see you again soon.